session is environmental flow as a necessity to restore the ecosystem of the Indus Basin. In this session, we have one keynote speaker, Dr. Chris Dickens. He's from the IWMI, IWMI, Sri Lanka, International Water Management Institute. He will be talking about environmental flows, ecosystem, and water sources management. Then we have very learned, panelist to throw light on this issue. First of all, I would like to request Mr. Rob Nawaz Saab, who is Senior Director of Conservation, WWF. Then I would like to request Dr. Arif Anwar, who is Principal Researcher at the IWMI, Pakistan. Dr. Hifza Rashid, who is Director General Water Quality, Pakistan Council of Research in Water Resources. Professor Dr. Bakshal Ashari is joining us online from Mehran University. He is Professor Emeritus and former Director of US-Pakistan Advanced Center on Water Resources. I would also like to request Mr. Zakir Syal Saab, who is a Director, Irrigation Department, Punjab. He has a lot of knowledge on different issues. So, ladies and gentlemen, this is very important issue we are going to discuss. Issue not only important but also critical. And this is the issue which mainly has been neglected, particularly in most of the developing worlds. We're least concerned with the environmental flow. Our maximum water is being diverted for agriculture purposes or other purposes. If we look at the health of the rivers, whether those are eastern rivers or western rivers, particularly at the downstream end of these rivers, we see that there is a number of issues related to water quantity and quality. I remember some time ago in 2018, we were working on the Eastern River to see the health of the rivers, how those rivers are behaving. And when we started that project, I requested Saif Anjam Saab. He was Secretary, Environmental Department at that time. He was chief guest at that session. So I put one question to him. Sir, if India, Modi Sarkar or any other, they are kind enough and they ask us how much water do you need to keep your rivers healthy, do we have any estimate? So his immediate response was that's how we don't have such kind of estimates. So if we don't have such kind of estimate, we don't have such kind of data, it means we don't have any understanding about it. Because your understanding is also developed on some kind of knowledge, information. If you don't have entirely no knowledge about it, then we would not be able to basically, take ownership or address that issue. So this is one of the most important aspect whenever we are talking about the ecosystem restoration, e-flows, whether it is the Manchar Lake, whether it is the Kinjar Lake, or in case of the below Kotri, or the case of eastern rivers. So this aspect is normally missing. So to start with, I would like to request our keynote speaker, Dr. Chris Dickens, who is going to speak on environmental flow, ecosystem, and water sources management. He will basically set the scene, and after that we will be able to engage our panelists in this discussion. Over to you, Chris.
Good day to everybody, and I hope you can see the presentation on my screen there. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's really good to be able to join you, even if remotely. So we're going to be talking about environmental flows, ecosystems, and water resource management. And so firstly, sorry, just a slow movement there. So what are environmental flows, or e-flows? Yeah, this is the very simplistic way of looking at it, where if you take the annual volume of water, the mean annual runoff, for example, and this portion down the bottom here could be called your e-flow or your environmental flow, and then everything above that is potentially usable water for agriculture, industry, etc. And very often these coarse annual figures like this are used. And, you know, for example, very often you would have a volume of something like 30–40% of the annual flow would be reserved for your e-flow. But it's not quite as simple as that. This is the definition of environmental flows that comes, which is pretty much regarded worldwide as the eminent definition. Environmental flows describe the quantity, timing, and quality of freshwater flows and levels necessary to sustain aquatic ecosystems, which in turn support human cultures, economies, livelihoods, and well-being. So it's all about the timing of flow. It's both the flow and the water quality, and it's all about protecting the ecosystem so that the ecosystem can then support livelihoods and well-being. It's not what was originally pictured, where environmental flows are all about green issues, conservation, devoid of sustainable development. This is about sustainable development. Environmental flows are necessary for sustainable development. So if you get away from the simple bar graph that we had before, and you look at a whole hydrograph, in this hydrograph here, the pale gray area is your natural flow, where you've got a wet season flood and a dry season, and then in the spring you start to get small floods coming along as the flows build up again for the wet season. The environmental flow may look something like this dark line, where you capture some of the big flood, but just the peak maybe, not the whole volume. Then during the dry season, you'll see that you need almost all of the flow to sustain the ecosystem. Then when you get to these small floods over here, perhaps only one of those floods is necessary, whereas there were three, only one of them is necessary to sustain the ecosystem. So that would then be identified as part of the e-flow. So this pale gray area then becomes the allocatable water. So, you know, obviously during the wet season, a large portion of the flow is allocatable to other purposes like industry and agriculture and so on. During the dry season, it gets a bit tricky because the e-flows is requiring most of the flow to sustain the ecosystem. So obviously dams play an important role here in maintaining e-flows, because dams could actually be used to provide water during the dry season, either to release downstream to sustain the ecosystem, or to provide for irrigation, etc. When we determine what the e-flows are, this is not just a rough process. It requires evidence. And there are many different ways of doing it. You get some which are fairly simple, which are based purely on the statistics of the hydrology. But this example here is much more sophisticated, what we call a holistic method, where you consider the full structure of the ecosystem. And so what's shown here is an aerial view of a river, showing the roughness, the structure of the river bed, the rocks and so on. And then you've got a map of the velocity of the water, and then the inundation depth of the water, and that would be done at multiple different depths and velocities and so on, and discharges. And the whole process is that you have a team of specialists who will have to work out what depth, for example, of water do you need to allow the fish to survive. It'll be a different depth during the time of migration and a different depth during the time when they're consolidating and overwintering, etc. So all of these specialists come in and they have to actually put down the evidence of what kind of depth and flow habitat is required to maintain the ecosystem. This also applies importantly to the riparian vegetation, which is also closely linked to the in-stream flow. And from that, you would work out the environmental flows at different times of the year. This is a model that we've developed, which is one of the most sophisticated because it links absolutely everything together. So if we just go through this from the left here, so if you take all the sources of change to a river, there's climate change, agriculture development, dams, communities, and so on, which are removing water from the system. So the stress they're putting on the system is they're changing the quantity, the quality, they're changing the habitats, and they also disturb the wildlife. So things like overfishing and things like that would also come in. So these are the stresses, and then its impact on the in-stream, the riparian, the floodplain, and on lakes. What we do is we take it all the way through to what we call endpoints. So how does that then connect to the livelihoods, to the ecosystem itself, and so on? So you can pick any one of these. Like if you want to consider a dam development, how does that dam impact on the quantity and on the quality? How does it impact on the in-stream habitat, the riparian habitat? And how does that actually affect the livelihoods of the people who need water and also the maintenance of the ecosystem itself? So that's like a conceptual model that we use. And then we flesh it out in great detail, and we build great big Bayesian networks where you have proper evidence documenting every single step of that relationship, right the way through from the different flows which are required, right the way through to the endpoints on the side, on the end over here. And then from that, you would actually build up an environmental flow. So this is what an environmental flow looks like to a hydrologist. If you were to, for example, if you have a big dam in the river and you want to implement environmental flows downstream, this is the kind of information you would give them. So this is the e-flow distribution. So in January, that's the flow. In February, that's the flow. But it's not a single flow, because some years you have wet seasons, other years you have dry seasons, but it needs to vary around that statistic. And so that's a 20 to 80% percentile in the middle. And this is the same data that's in the table down here. So if you took a 50 percentile, that would give you the number of cubic meters per second for each month of the year. And then you would have to determine if you're in a wet year or dry year in order to release accordingly. So that is what an environmental flow looks like. It's not the simplistic 38% of annual flow, although obviously you can convert this into that statistic. But now there's another complication, and that's when it comes to the ecosystem. Because environmental flow is not just one figure. If you have a river which you want to maintain an absolutely pristine condition, for example, if it's in a conservation area, for whatever reason you want to maintain it in pristine condition, then we call it, there's this classification scheme where we would call that an A-class river. So it's in natural condition. And then B would be where there's a little bit of abstraction for irrigation and so on, but it's largely intact and so on, until you go down to, say, for example, a D, which is largely modified. It's full of alien species, half the water's disappeared, there's pollution in the water, but the river's still maintaining to some extent. And we consider that to be sustainable, but only just. So we commonly say that this is the boundary between sustainability and unsustainability. If you then go down to an E, it no longer provides the services that people require of that river. So your river becomes a complete waste. It may provide one service, and that's just to carry away pollution or something like that, but it substantially has lost the benefits to society, and no society would want that. No society would plan that. Now, the big thing is that when you set an environmental flow, you really need to upfront have a vision for what that river needs to look like, ideally in consultation with stakeholders. And the vision might differ, for where the river passes through a city, for example. So when it's in the city, you might have to accept that it's going to pick up some pollution from the city. So it will become slightly degraded. So perhaps in the city, it might be a C or maybe even a D. But then when it's out in the mountain stream, you might want to say, okay, that's going to be an A. So we must set an environmental flow for an A. And that will be different for the environmental flow where you've got a D, where you're accepting some level of degradation. And so the environmental flow needs to be closely linked to the vision for the water resource itself, with the ecosystem in the middle. So what does that mean for the flow? So if we go back to our bar here, so if this is our total water resource here, this is our environmental flow, and that's our withdrawal. So this would be for a B class, so that's almost natural. And you can see we've got a little bit of free water over here, which is not being used yet. That's still available for allocation. If we were to change that to a D class, so we decide, okay, we're going to trash this river, we're quite happy for it to become really, really stressed, then we would drop the E flow in this situation here. The abstraction would remain the same. So theoretically, you get more available water. And this is one of the perverse things that people need to be very careful about with E flows, is that you seem to have more water available because you've now allocated less to the environment. Well, that's true. You have got more water available. But what is not clear is what is the consequence. And so the model that we have, where we link the environmental flows through to endpoints, then we would have measures of the consequences of having done that, of reducing this to a D class. So we would know exactly what that means in terms of cost to livelihoods and ecosystem health, etc. So you would have a different hydrograph for each environmental management class. So that one might be your natural hydrograph. The C would look like that, and the D would be much lower. And obviously, depending on the actual system, you would have to determine for each system. This is a tool that EMI makes use of, which is called GEFIS, the Global Environmental Flow Information System. This is freely available online. So that map there is showing the environmental flow required to maintain the present ecological condition. So some parts of the world where the ecosystem is in almost pristine condition, let's take the center of the Congo here, where the great big Congo jungle is pretty much in pristine condition. You'll see that according to the legend here, 80 to 100% of the flow is required to maintain that river in that condition. And you can see going right the way through to a lot of places where the environmental flows are around about 20% or even less. Unfortunately, this particular model has a lot of gaps in it, including a lot of Pakistan, based on the hydrology, where it's not sensitive in very arid situations. So when you have very arid situations, this model doesn't work particularly well, and you need to actually then do a more deliberate environmental flow assessment. Obviously, this is a really low confidence kind of assessment, but this tool is now being used in the SDGs as part of the water stress indicator. So SDG 6.4.2 has this estimation as part of its calculation of water stress. So we have some hard choices that we need to make, and in water resource planning, this is something that we have to do. And like I say, it needs to be based on the vision that you have for a particular situation. So let's just look at, if we take a present situation like this, where you've got an environmental flow, and this is being withdrawn, and so you've got this little bit of free water here. But now what about in the climate future, where the total water resource is now reduced? You have two options. Either you maintain your withdrawal and you take away e-flows, so you actually now eat into your environmental flow. You can do that, but it will result in a collapse in the sustainability and the resilience of the system. And that means a loss of resilience for people as well as the ecosystem. The alternative is that you keep the e-flow and you reduce the withdrawal. Obviously, you can then use up that free water, and so you probably get this kind of situation where you've maintained the e-flow, but you've still had to reduce the withdrawal compared to what you have at the beginning. Now, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's a matter of choices, and those choices need to be informed by your visioning process and your whole strategy for the basin. So it's really key that you consider your vision. It's important that you consider what kind of a river do you want, what kind of ecological class do you want that river to be, then set the environmental flow for that, and then you need to stick to it. Because I've seen so many situations where countries prescribe an environmental flow, and the minute it hits the table, they promptly ignore it, and they would just use up that environmental flow for other purposes anyway. So you have to then really stick to the vision which has been set. If the vision process was done properly, then there should be some basis to do that. So thank you very much. I look forward to any questions that might come along.
Thank you, Chris, for giving us an overview of environmental flow, ecosystem, and resource management. Before we are going to the panelists, I would like to ask from the audience if they have any question to the keynote speaker, Dr. Chris Deacon. Yes, sir. Ali Tawqir Sheikh, sir. Chris, there is one question to you. कोई माइक है यार कोई? और वैसे तो थके हुए हो सारे सारे मैनेजमेंट कमेटी. इधर आ जाओ सर. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was a very good overview and very comprehensively explained and in simpler terms for a person like me to understand what exactly it may possibly mean. I was just trying to understand this in the transboundary context and to apply the notion retroactively if it has not been envisioned before constructing infrastructure on this. So it can be a political issue, but I want to focus only on the non-political aspect by saying that how would this concept be retroactively and progressively introduced, progressively in the sense that one cannot be very radical to have very ideal solution on day one. So maybe you have some case study or some experience you can share with us. Thank you.
Sure. So if it's going to be done retroactively, it would be a problem if you've already overutilized the river, and that's a common situation in developed countries. In Australia, for example, they set the e-flows and they discovered that there was not sufficient flow left in the river to actually maintain the e-flows. So what the government set about doing is actually buying permits back from the allocations that they'd previously made, which was obviously expensive and also not particularly popular. It's a difficult process, difficult political process, how to actually pull water back from consumption and put it back into the river. And just one point that's important to make as well is that there are some situations where use of water need not detract from environmental flows. So in other words, where the water remains in the river, or recreation, for example, or tourism, where you might have industry built on environmental flows. So you don't have to detract from the environmental flows. So you can do it retroactively, but obviously the best way is to establish environmental flows for rivers which are still in a good condition, so that you can set their limit before development takes place. That's the perfect situation. With regard to transboundary, obviously the science is not particularly concerned about the political boundary between two countries. So theoretically, the e-flow on one side of the board, on the other side, should be the same. obviously depending on the particular ecosystem, but it should be the same, but at any rate, it should be aligned. So the proper situation for transboundary rivers is that the e-flow gets done for the whole basin. And then all the different riparian countries participate in that, and they share in the results. If one country does an e-flow independent from another, then you still need to try and align the two e-flow assessments. Thank you.
So thank you, Chris, for this explanation. Ladies and gentlemen, I am going to place the most important question to one of the youngest panelists, Dr. Hifza. In fact, what are the critical factors to determine the the e-flow requirements? How we can, it is not simply quantity, quality, or are there any other consideration? What are the critical components?
Thank you very much, sir. E-flow, as it has been originated from the Brisbane Declaration 2007, and it is the quality, quantity, and timings of river flow required to sustain the ecological, environmental, and human health and well-being as well as the livelihood. So the critical factors depends upon the method to be used for the e-flow determination. According to Food and Agriculture Organization, suggests that the countries which have the lower capacity, they can use the simpler method, just looking at the tables and using the desktop analysis of the hydrological data. And the countries which do have the capacity, they can use the complex approaches like doing some systematic surveys of the river cross sections, and then taking and obtaining the characterization parameters for hydraulic, hydrological, ecological, and biological data. In this regard, several agencies have done some breakthroughs, like IWMI. They have developed the e-flow calculator, a global e-flow calculator, as well as regional e-flow models. So that could give, that has given the lowest confidence, with the lowest confidence level, the amount of water required for the use and the withdrawal for all the countries of the world. Pakistan, where we are just to start this methodology, I think it will be good to use the e-flow calculator, and then some parts of the rivers, or some of the rivers which actually requires the real calculation of the e-flow, can be practically validated using the field and the survey approaches. And some other critical factors also depends upon the objectives of our e-flow determination and its management. Like we are very much concerned about our eastern river. So for such rivers, obviously the data quality, hydraulic, hydrological, water quality with context to the SDG 6.3.2, and then impact of the human activities, as well as the cost benefit analysis is also important. So the cost benefit with context to the upstream and downstream effect would be very useful. And similarly, the scenario analysis, and that could be done in the light of the climate change. So, and finally, it would depend upon which type of the model we are using and which type of the parameters we required, and then obviously which type of the habitat are existing around those rivers or within the aquatic life. So to sustain the ecological, aquatic, and the terrestrial habitat, flora and fauna, we need to consider all these important factors. And finally, we have to consider the productive use and the monetary quality of the water use and withdrawal from the different rivers.
Comprehensive, the factor you have elaborated. Just wanted to have your insight, because
Pakistan, and our water quality analysis during wet and dry periods have given some very alarming news for these rivers. We have found the higher level of pollution coming from the under the transboundary influence, specifically microbial contamination and chemical, which specifically the inorganic and organic and heavy metals. And in the organic context, we are also having the detected the issues of persistent organic pollutants, which are some of the restricted chemicals. So they are coming specifically from the when we receives a little flow from Indian side in the Ravi River, and then Sutlej and Chenab River. So with these high pollutants, when we detect these at the points where these are emerging into the Pakistan, and later on we have find out that when the water flows down to the downstream sites, their levels becomes lower. So the pollutants which are coming from the neighboring side decrease down while flowing throughout their course in Pakistan. Similarly, if we talk about the Indus River, it's from the upstream side, unfortunately, we have also detected some lower traces of restricted chemicals, which are persistent organic pollutants, and they are threats for our, not only for the human life, but for our aquatic life, specifically fish, and can disturb the ecological profile. And when we compare the seasonal variation, we have seen the higher levels as expected in the dry period, but in the during the wet season, we experience the higher loads of sediments in the form of the turbidity of the water, and this can also be a cause of concern for the aquatic habitats.
So whenever there is more sediment, there is also chances, we have detected that there are more persistent organic pollutant found in those sediments as well. So thank you very much, Dr. Hifzam. Now I would turn to Dr. Bakhshar Lashari. Dr. Saab, are you available?
Yes, sir.
Sir, sir, thank you very much for joining us. My question to you, as you belong to the lower riparians and you have witnessed the issues of e-flow, and time and again we discuss about this. So, in your opinion, should there be a dialogue and a process to understand this phenomena between the upstream and the downstream? If yes, how we can move forward?
Thank you, Dr. Saab. I think we have got a lot of information from the previous panelist, the Dr. Saba, and Dr. Kirs has well explained about the e-flow. Regarding this, the Indus Basin, definitely this Indus Basin has the good advantage that our river flows mostly remains up to the last the control structure, the Kotri barrage. Until that, we have this irrigation system, and we divert the water some quantity. So therefore, this whole river luckily remains fresh, and the ecosystem mostly remains the healthy. Only the problem in that reach could be the quality of the water. So that is the major threat to the ecosystem, because our flora and fauna is mostly dependent on this fresh water. So I'm coming back to your question that the dialogue should be processed from the upper and lower riparian. Definitely, this is very, very important, the element that need to be, because the lower riparian, I just start from the delta. Delta is the really serious issue in this Indus Basin, because it is the last point of Pottery Barrage. After that, the flow downstream Pottery sometimes is zero, sometimes we luckily get more flow when it's the flooding. So the dialogue should consist on understanding that what is the economic benefit of the delta or the overall the ecosystem of the Indus Basin. That information, if we shared with the community, all the stakeholders, including community, including the policymakers, including the professionals, they can give the clear picture. Because as you mentioned earlier, that unfortunately this environmental e-flow or environmental flow are not properly determined or estimated until now, and we have no idea that how much the requirement, what is the depth, as Chris mentioned, that what should be the velocity, what should be the depth of the overall, so our aquatic life can take the benefit. So I think yes, the dialogue should be processed, and the focus should be on this, that losses include degradation of both biotic and abiotic factors of the ecosystem, and economic benefits of the e-flow both at upper and lower riparian, and comprehend a trade-off between the cost and the losses of reduced inflow and the benefits of sustainable e-flow, aiming to ultimately contribute to economic growth of the country. Knowledge sharing, that will be very useful from the upper and lower riparian, so we will be on the same page. And of course, the trust building from the upper and lower. So I think we should have this dialogue process immediately, but based on the information that what we are going to share with all the stakeholders. Over to you, Dr.
Should start dialogue between upstream and downstream, but based on some kind of science-based evidence. So now I will turn my question to Dr. Abhinav Sahib. I think WWF has done a lot of work on e-flow particularly. As I remember, they have determined e-flow requirement of the eastern rivers as well. So I would like to get your take on the possible options for the e-flow management, keeping in view the climate variability, regulated and treated bound water.
Thank you, Dr. Sab. So I think it's a very important question. I think when looking at Pakistan, I'm just going to take two quotes. One is Sheikh Sab has pointed out that trying to take politics out of water, it's impossible. Water management in Pakistan is 100% political. Until we address that, we can do all the e-flows we want in the world, and not going to fly. The second thing is what we've learned over the last, I think, decade or so is that taking the whole river as a whole and trying to apply an e-flow to it is too complicated. It goes back to a bit of what I said about the political influence, but I think we're not good at just taking on big projects. We love them. We love the loans and the ADB and World Bank grants, but we always take too much we can chew. I think what we've learned, so what we're trying to do now is very much an e-flow project, Recharge Pakistan, and it actually stemmed from the floods, from the 2010 floods. Everybody asked the common man, 2010 floods was seen as a natural disaster. And floods keep Pakistan alive. If you don't have floods, there is no Pakistan. So we took that, we invited RAM, we invited the Ramsar mission. Ramsar is a Ramsar advisory mission, which was a technical group which came, assessed the damage, assessed the issues of the 2010 floods. This is in 2012. And they gave a list of recommendations. The first one was, go and see how China does it. They've taken dead rivers and have brought them back to life. So we took politicians, we took the army engineers, we took the scientists, and we showed them how it's done. And that actually changed. It actually, they started to understand what e-flows is about. It's not just about the quantity of water, it's also about the quality of water. It's about using your existing assets. Pakistan, mashallah, has, I think, more than 120 natural wetlands. They are your water tanks. We have an inbuilt filtration system in our country, in the north. We have storage already in Pakistan, and we have a beautiful coastline. We have a delta. So using that, we started looking around and seeing what we can do. And at that time, GCF was coming up, and we looked at having a blend of the engineering, the concrete, but also looking at nature-based solutions. Why? Because nature-based solutions are some of the most I think, undervalued approaches, not only in Pakistan, but around the world. They've been around for hundreds of years, but we can't get our head around them. If they don't cost $10 million, it's not worth doing. There are a lot of solutions out there which have been applied in Pakistan, which are being applied, which are working. But how to integrate that has always been a challenge. So working with the Ministry of Climate Change and the Ministry of Water and Resources, we started putting together a project, and we looked at that blend of hardcore engineering and the MBS. And to answer your question, Dr. about where to do this, well, there are some good prediction models in Pakistan. We've picked up the basin, the flood basin, and we looked where the vulnerability is. We also had to take in political decisions. We can't just exclude one province because it's not vulnerable. So what we've done, we've actually prioritized our sites all across the country, looking at either the floodplain or the hill torrents, because hill torrents are as much disastrous and damaging as floods, and have come up with a plan for Recharge Pakistan. The original name is really long. It's a very kind of long-winded project which we submitted to GCF. Before that, the Ministry of Climate Change took it to the Prime Minister, and they talked about recharge, and it clicked in his mind, and it became Recharge Pakistan. So it has three components. It's what we are good at, WWF. It's on the ground, field-based, watershed level, irrigation level interventions, showing how it works. Then moving to the policy level, and then the last one, which is the most difficult one, and the one we've actually been mostly, obviously criticized, but question marks, is how do you address this issue of interprovincial coordination for water, because everybody seems to own it. And I think one of the things so inshallah it'll start soon. We've got our feasibilities undergoing, so we've identified the sites. We've now engaging to see what will go where, so it's actually quite detailed level planning, and then we start the implementation step by step. So we're not going to go the entire sites. We have 12 sites. We'll shortlist the top most vulnerable ones, then we'll work up. It's going to take 20, 30 years. It's not a 5-year or 7-year project. The one thing I would end with, and I think which has been mentioned, I'm sure has been mentioned since the start of this conference, is data. Data is power. Not in Pakistan, but everybody likes to have power. And we're so bad at sharing data. We have it in our computers, in our books. It really angers me that the data is there, but because of our differences, because of the policies, we're not sharing data across provinces, across departments, so that we can come up with something that's realistic. Thank you, Dr.
That's how you have strengthened our viewpoint that data is power, and it is very important to have some kind of evidence to convince the policymaker and practitioner to focus on this issue. And you have highlighted on the Recharge Pakistan, where it can help to revive our wetlands also as well. So how to focus on the what should be the structure? In fact, this is the most critical question I'm going to ask Dr. Arif Anwar. You know, and we know that Gonzalez et al. In 2005, they determined e-flow requirement below Code Tree. I'm just talking about the below Code Tree, not Eastern River or the Manchar Lake or the other wetlands. And according to them, they recommended basically 500 cubic of water daily. And again, 25 million acre feet of water over a span of 5 years. It means 5 million acre feet of water each year, okay, to flush the salt and to keep the Indus Delta healthy. How, if you are given this assignment to just make sure, what could be the structure, organizational, institutional, how would we could move forward? So this is an important question.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. I think, first of all, we need to remind ourselves that our current practice in the Indus River system is that it is only the irrigation departments that are entitled to ask for withdrawals of water. No water and sanitation agency can actually ask for water. It goes via IRSA, as we all know, up to the Water and Power Development Authority for Tarbela releases, Mangla, and so on and so forth. It is the irrigation departments. And so it's what they call the indenting system, the water ordering system. And whether it's Sindh, where at least there has been that study you referred to on e-flows, or whether it's Punjab, who now have a better idea of what e-flows are needed for, let's say, Ravi, Satluj, Bias, and things. The indenting practice at the moment is they will only ask for indent for water for irrigation. There is no e-flow. There is no the water supply agency for Lahore may need water, but they can't ask for that. The only slight difference perhaps to this, which is slightly off and maybe gives us some example of what we can do, would be Khanpur Dam. Because in Khanpur Dam now, you don't have e-flows, but at least you have the industrial stakeholders and Islamabad city. So going forward, and there's an opportunity, I think, you talk about the management organization. The provinces are creating these water commissions. And the water commission potentially could look at these different sectoral requirements. So the water commissions potentially, at least, could accept requirements for e-flows, whether that is in the delta or whether that is in the Punjab for these rivers that at the moment we don't have water coming in from our eastern rivers, or whether it's for lakes or whether it's for wetlands. Which organization makes that case to the commission? I'm still not sure. I think the irrigation departments have more than enough responsibility. We've heard from Anjum Saif the size of the irrigation network and so. And they have an interest in that, and they would continue to present their case for the irrigation requirements. But there needs to be stakeholders who have an equal voice on these commissions so that those requirements can also be put into the system. Then the commissions will have this challenging task that the requirements will probably exceed what the provinces have allocated, and then they're going to have to make that sort of negotiation. And I think that probably going forward is going to be one of the most central roles of these water commissions. It will be, again, I'm not sure that it's got to be, for example, the Sindh irrigation department saying, this is how much water we need in the delta. But somewhere, some organization has got to make that case to potentially what might be the Sindh Water Commission. It's a little early days, they haven't quite got there yet, and make that case. And similarly for the eastern rivers of Punjab. Somebody's going to make that case that the Ravi needs this much water. When you divert water through these link canals, you've got to let this amount continue to flow all the way downstream. That gives me hope. I'm optimistic that the Commission can live up to those expectations that we have of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arif. Now you can see that why I have not invited Dr. Zakir Syal before that, because as you mentioned that basically it is the irrigation department. They are drawing water from our systems, not mostly except Karachi are part of the Hyderabad. The other all are drawing water from the groundwater. Water and sanitation agencies. So main user of water is the irrigation department. So our question to Zakir, to you is there any possibility or any thinking within the department about the health of the ecosystem, health of the rivers, and can there be a possibility that we save some water in the irrigation sector, where we used to listen that there is a huge wastage of water? Can we save some water and use that water for the restoration of the ecosystem? Yes. Particularly when we talk in the context of the Punjab Eastern River? Is it possible, or is there any thinking?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you, Dr. Saab, and all the panelists, keynote speaker. They have elaborated the issue very well. So, Dr. Saab, when we look at our Indus Basin, why environmental flows are required, I will just in 1-2 sentences, that we have quite uncertainty in our available water resources. For example, we have 70-80% of flow during 3 months. Second, our challenge is that we have Indus Water Treaty, we don't have flow in the Eastern River. So these are the basic constraints due to which we have to look at environmental flow to keep the rivers healthy. Of course, these rivers are very big resource or contribution towards our groundwater recharge source, our ecosystem maintenance, aquaculture. Seawater intrusion is very important. This is another limitation to below Kotli barrage. We must have some certain quantity of flow to control the seawater intrusion and the wash down the salts. And also for drought mitigation, this is climatic changes impacts. So we should have minimum environmental flows for the drought mitigation. And then in my opinion, as in the different parts of the world has been done, that the rivers have been given rights of human being. In my opinion, the rivers are living things. We should not treat them as a water course or only water carrier channels. I think, in my opinion, like in Supreme Court of India, they have declared one of their important river as a human being. So they should have equal rights for their protection, minimum flow, so that they can maintain their ecosystem, their life, wetlands, all these, so that they should be treated as a living thing. As Dr. Arif Anwar Saab has mentioned very rightly, as per our current practices, the irrigation departments are only demanding and supplying water for irrigation purpose, which is of course, 90% of water sources are being consumed in agriculture sector, and irrigation department is the water provided to the agriculture sector. But due to with the passage of current innovation changes, we have developed national water policy, then we have provincial water policy, where we have prioritized the sectoral allocations. And number one is the drinking water policy, water requirement for the drinking, and then for irrigation, industrial, and environmental flow is there first time in the history of Pakistan and Punjab province, that under the sectoral allocation, there is environmental flow, although it has been kept at the bottom, but it is, of course, at least it is there. So as Punjab Water Commission has been established and notified, so of course they will have to accumulate the whole water resources in the shape of one resource, and then to allocate priority wise as per given in water policy and water resources. Of course, environmental flow will be there. And one of the recent example is there that Punjab Irrigation Department has allocated 100 cubic of water from Link Canal to the city of Lahore. So this has saved the groundwater pumpage in the city as well. So these are the example, and these are the things we must consider environmental flows, and we must allocate the water, available water resources as per our requirements, and environmental flow should be given due priority. And as per previous practice, we should not go only for irrigation purpose. And department is also trying to transform itself from irrigation department into water source department, so that it is custodian of all water resources and then distributor of equal share to the all sectorals. Thank you.
Thank you, Zakir Sahab. At least now there is a realization from the irrigation department that environmental flow is an important component of the whole system. So thank you very much. All the panelists, I would like to take now a few questions. First of all, I would like to see if we have any online participant who would like to have any comments or question. Before that, we forget them. Any of the बेटे है कोई online? कोई question या कोई? Yeah.
Hello?
Solo, hello, yes please.
Yeah, Stefan Wimburg here. I really enjoyed the discussion after the excellent presentation of Dr. Dickens. And what he illustrated is it can be quite a complex model that requires a number of parameters to characterize the hydraulic, the hydrological situation, as well as assessing livelihoods, economic parameters, and combine all that. So it's data hungry. On the other hand, I think the colleagues from the WWF made that point very clearly, that there is a problem, as there's a problem in many countries with data sharing, not only across countries, but also even across provinces and departments, if I understood him right. So how to overcome that? I think we all agree that assessing and integrating environmental flows is absolutely essential for a sustainable development pathway. But how to overcome that data sharing problem? Even if there is data, if that is not available, that really makes it difficult to do that. And without monitoring and data, we will never be able to manage it. Dr. Reef suggested then the setting up of water commissions. Will that be helpful in terms of data sharing? That would be very interesting to hear more about that. Thank you. Over.
The question is to you. Number one, E-flow is a complex phenomenon. It requires basically data which is missing, and data sharing is not common in the country. How we can overcome this issue of data sharing, and whether the Commission can take care of this data sharing, data generation or data sharing?
I'm not sure how much a commission, because a commission is at a provincial level, might address the issue of data sharing. In our country, there's also a geopolitical dimension to this issue of making the data very accessible and public. There are certain fears around it could be used against us, and that is always an apprehension. I'm not so sure how you overcome that aspect of it. I think what we want to avoid, but it's, again, I have no silver bullet to solve this, is what's also happening is that as institutions become a little more cash strapped, they need money, they start using the data to sell it as a way of just generating revenue. Many of these organizations are state organizations. They're run by taxpayers' money anyways, and then the taxpayers are paying twice for the same data. If we can avoid that, that would be very, very helpful. It's been raised repeatedly, sort of thing. Maybe as a starting point, and maybe this needs legislation, certainly for, let's say, federal institutions, that at least between institutions, federal institutions, there should be legislation that they should not be able to charge for data. Maybe NGOs and private citizens are seen sort of cash rich and they can buy it or something, but at least between government institutions, that might be a starting point, and it might make it a little bit more accessible. But at the moment, even between government institutions, it's not easily accessible. We often work with our partners, and we find that they run into the same sort of difficulties. commissions, because they're at a provincial level, they may have some influence at the provincial sort of level in making data more accessible. I'm not aware that it's something that's on the cards yet. I don't think it's anything that's mentioned in the Water Acts on the basis of which the commissions are being formed. But that's not to say that that won't change in the future if it's really recognized as a constraint. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Arif. Now we can take questions from the House. If anybody would like to have question, Sheikh Saab or any other? जी जी बेटे हाँ फैजान.
Yes, thank you, sir. This is Faizan from PCRWR. So my question to panelists is that when we talk about upper riparian and lower riparian, we try to conceive only Punjab and Sindh. To my perspective, in our country scenario, the upper riparian is the Gilgit-Baltistan, which is basically the water tower of our country. We completely forget that. And the lower riparian is below the Indus Delta. So those two areas or communities are basically the sufferers, whether it is in Gilgit-Baltistan or in the Indus Delta. In between is basically the are getting the benefit of these water. So to me, before determining the e-flow requirement, we should start defining who are the upper and lower riparian and in between them. So what are your thoughts? Any one of the panelists can comment on that.
So anyone, Abhinavasab, I would also like to add something. It is always remain in mind, because when we talk about the irrigation system, the area Faizan has mentioned, basically they are the beneficiaries of all the hydropower projects. They are the beneficiaries. They take all kind of waters. Whereas it is a common resource and it belongs to all country. Is it possible that we get some kind of compensation from these people and invest that on the upper riparians and the lower riparian, which are basically both are affecting, as Faizan has mentioned? So over to you.
It's an interesting question. I think it's an interesting answer, because I think as we look into the billion tree tsunami, which is essentially, I may agree, we have to look at the catchments. If you don't look at the catchments, you're not going to, I mean, you're going to have a lot of water in a very short amount of time. So trying to determine any e-flow under that scenario is going to be next to impossible. We need a gradual release, either in the forested areas or from the glaciers. One of the things which there's been a huge political backing of billion tree and now 10 billion tree. And a lot of it is actually looking into the northern areas, into KP, into, again, you said the water towers of Pakistan. And no one's actually looked at the effect that this is going to have on your downstream flow. Because as you plant more trees, you have more retention. You have more retention, you actually have less water coming down. So if you do not link these two biomes, the water catchments, the forest catchments, the glaciers, and then the plains, I think 10 years down the line we're going to be again in big trouble, because we'll have water, but it'll be actually stored up in the north. And in many places that's good. You want good retention, so you get an even flow. But again, when you're starting to determine e-flows, and as population, as requirement increases, you're going to have, I think you're going to have another kind of conflict arise between these areas. But I agree, we can't ignore these. In fact, whenever I present a presentation about our work with Pakistan, it's mountain to mangroves. Our entire system starts up in the glaciers or up in Gilgit or in Khorasan, and it ends up in the mangroves. If we do not, I mean, we can use this political slogan, if the delta dies, Pakistan dies. There's a reason. I mean, if the delta is thriving, if it's adapting and it's growing, it means you have your e-flows in place. So I think telling that story is very important, not only to policymakers but to the public in large. so that people get the idea. And I think one thing we've been doing, not only for water, but taking people from Sindh, from the delta up into Khorasan, where there's no problem with water. Water's everywhere, potable water. Just go out, fill your bottle from the stream and drink it. Getting that connection across communities is very important to get a political backing for e-flows. Thank you.
Dr. Azim? So.
Thank you, sir. Whenever we are talking about the e-flows, our hands, our words are going to the either side that the India is not allowing e-flows and whatsoever. But apart from these rivers, Indus River system is solely maintained and operated by our country. So, number one, I will endorse the suggestion by Dr. Ashraf that at least we should have a national dialogue on Indus River system from upper to lower. Faizan mentioned the Gilgit-Baltistan to delta is the reach of the river. So at different reaches, how the pollution status is, how much the e-flows are required, from where the e-flows will come, who is the pollutant, who will pay for that pollution. So in this regard, PCRWR is a national organization. So before the dialogue, is PCRWR ready to have a science-based evidence for the components, the different segments from Gilgit-Baltistan to the delta, that from what are the sources of pollution, from where the pollution is coming, to have at least to sensitize the stakeholders, sensitize the provinces that this pollution is coming from this province, and this province has to pay or to give some allocation of water as a e-flows. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. In fact, I was going to, give my remarks in the closing, closing remarks. I will address this issue. Any other question? So before closing.
I'm a bit confused about the answer to the fourth question, which is about the structure of e-flow management. And Dr. Arif, you can help with Dr. Zakir. My request is to both of you. It seems to me that you're pinning a bit more hopes on the commissions. If each commission was to take charge and somehow magically deliver, despite all the constraints that we have mentioned, it would amount to fragmentizing the basin, so to speak. Would add to interprovincial discord on demand. And pardon me for saying this, it's a very serious forum, but these will be TLP time bombs of water. Because over a period of time, our differences will become so huge that there will be no authority or no management mechanism at the basin level. So I was wondering, instead of putting the irrigation system at the front seat to get allocations for environment and moving and forwarding to those who need it, can their access to the Indus River water be reduced, and the upper cap, 5, 10, 20, whatever percentage, is for the environmental purposes dispersed directly by IRSA or some other institution? Thank you.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I probably didn't explain myself very well. I see it perhaps working that although the gestation, the birth of the commission comes from the irrigation department, they're currently entrusted to do that, and that's understandable because the knowledge powerhouse of the province when it comes to these sort of water issues rests with the irrigation. But I think over time I expect the commission will become more independent. And so the way I see it, perhaps one way of its working, is that the Water Commission might one day take over the requests to IRSA, to the federal government, for the water that's being released every 10 days. So the Water Commission would receive the request from the irrigation department, but the Water Commission would also receive the e-flows. The Water Commission would also receive potable water requests. And then it would be for the Water Commission to put that forward, that, okay, this is the water coming, and this is how much we're going to allocate to e-flows, whoever is the stakeholder that represents the e-flows. It could be Environment Department, it could be civil society. Similarly for WASAs, and similarly for irrigation. I think the irrigation department personally has more than enough on its plate in managing this vast irrigation system. There's a huge legacy of years and years of managing it. It'll always be a bit difficult to shift them away from prioritizing irrigation. I think you make a very valid point there. And I think they should be allowed to be the stakeholder that is the voice for the irrigation system. We recognize how important it is. We've heard today, it's the breadbasket. Our food security depends on it. So we shouldn't try to demonize them. But you're absolutely right that if they're given this sort of conflicting thing, the e-flows might be the poorer cousin. So somehow we've got to make sure that there is a stakeholder that represents that voice. And I think, you're absolutely right. There is another option, as you say. Another model might be to top slice the allocation. I'm very familiar with the Water Accord, and in fact, the civil canals allocation to the KP province is top sliced. There's 3-point-something million acre feet that's done that way. But just being pragmatic about it, it is a federation of provinces. That might be a much more difficult win to get to that level that, okay, you could argue that the delta is a national resource. Everybody would argue that the port of Karachi is a national resource, not just a Sindh resource. We all depend on it. You could argue that that is the case, and therefore the e-flows for the delta should be top sliced and so on and so forth. But then you're getting into interprovincial issues and so on and so forth. So I think there are probably easier wins. At a lower scale, there may be wetlands that are seen really maybe as within a provincial domain. There may be inland lakes, water qualities issues. And I think with this new structure that we've put in, I'm not a great fan of having lots of institutional things. I think the Commission, there is enough space there for that institution to take on that responsibility. As I said, I'll really emphasize that. I think that there have to be champions for whether it's water quality issues, whether it's e-flows or things like that could be represented and their voice heard at these commissions. Thank you.
So Arif, thank you very much. Dr. Hifsa, would you like to respond to Somar Saab, question or any?
Sir, I want to add something that when we talk about the Indus Basin and Delta, it's no doubt a big picture and the macro level problem, but we should also not ignore the spring shed management because in hilly areas, in Murray and the northern areas and in salt range, we have lots of springs, and there is also an issue of the upstreams and downstream, some mineral activities, mineral extraction and mining, and some other, adding the pollution activities through anthropogenic process that can also add this pollution in the spring and deteriorates its quality. And similarly, as 20 years ago, we had lots of beautiful springs with a good flow, but now under the climate change impact, those springs are also drying. So at the micro level, I just want to emphasize on the springs watershed management as well.
And we have witnessed, such kind of phenomena in the rain-fed agri areas. For example, in the Pothwar as well. We were with the Asia Foundation. We were studying the political economy of agriculture and seeing when we interviewed the community at the downstream of for example, the Soan River, Haru River, all those, and they were saying that the health of their small river is now almost deteriorated. They are not getting water even for drinking purposes. So because at the upstream, the people have started buying land and then developing the water resources, building small and dams and ponds, and water that was going to the downstream for their purposes, particularly for their domestic purposes. They told us that their dug wells are now drying, mostly they have dried up. So this is basically the phenomena occurring all wherever we are not basically taking care of the environment. We are not taking, whenever we are developing the water sources, in fact, we are not taking care of the other factors, the low riparian rights. So one time, this will be an issue for the Potohar, even Potohar region. There will be a huge hue and cry from the downstream users. Is there any comments from the online participant before we close it up? Ji sir. Ji, Dr. Azim.
The question came to my mind listening to Dr. Hifsa. Rabnawaz Sahab discussed about the 1 billion tree tsunami, then the 10 billion tree tsunami. So I'm sure that will help in controlling some of the sediments coming into the river. But the unwanted pollutants that you discussed in your short presentation, would these river plantation help the issue of these unwanted pollutants coming into the river? Or is there any study on that, or what's your opinion?
Plantation is good to restore the ecological system, but I think unless we have strict enforcement to restrict the usage of these pesticides and the POPs based chemicals, then that would be the only way that we can stop. And also we should, as the data sharing is very important, so if there are some transboundary impacts, obviously that if we have the collaboration at the both sides to restrict the use as well as its disposal into the water bodies, then that would be the only way to stop its addition into the water bodies.
Yes, please.
I think the irony of it is that so-called development projects are promoting this. So if you look at GB, there's no agrochemicals in GB. There was no concept. But now you have potato farming, you have more intensive farming. You go to the bazaar, there's no regulation on the chemicals being sold in GB and Pakistan. And those are leaking down into your rivers.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to let you know that we have talked about a lot about the data availability and data sharing. As I mentioned, and Dr. Hifsa also mentioned, that we are, for the last 3 years, we are taking care of the water quality, and also we are collecting data of quantity at the strategic location on the eastern rivers, particularly Ravi and Satluj. That data is readily available on our website. If you look at the report, that is available, and we are still continuing recording that data. Similarly, one of our report that addresses the surface water quality of the entire Pakistan in Indus Basin irrigation system, all rivers, right, starting from the Khanjarab Pass to the Arabian Sea. It covers. It will be published, inshallah, next month. So you will get data. The point I am going to make those professionals who intend to work on e-flow requirements, kindly let us know your data requirement. What kind of data you need and at what frequency? The question, as Mira Somru Sahab has. So we are ready to put some resources to plan some studies to provide you data. Kindly let us know, because most of time we listen non-availability of data, and this is basically the many time people they argue that because of the non-availability of the data, this is happening. So kindly let us know what kind of data, at what frequency you need data, so that we can plan our future research accordingly. So with these remarks, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much to all our colleagues who joined online, Dr. Lashari, Dr. Chris Dickon, and all others who have joined. I'm thankful to the panelists, Zakir Saab, Dr. Hifza, Dr. Nawaz Sahib, and all the our participants who came. Definitely, you travel a lot and you came here to share knowledge. We wish you all the best for your 2 days deliberation, and we wish you safe journey back home. So thank you very much.